Professor Deon is from the director of the Center for Business and Professional Ethics at the University of Pretoria. Also, I did ask Imtiaz Ahmed, the Chief Investment Officer at Macquarie First South, about socially responsible indices and investment. He says there's definitely a place for them. But how seriously does the investment community at large take the likes of the SRI when its mandate really is to outperform?
It's interesting to see, if you look worldwide at the patterns there, that the SRI sector is a growing sector, and that we've seen very dramatic growth in that specific market. So it's quite clear that institutional investors and other investors are taking a look at that. And I think there's a specific logic to that companies who act socially responsible are...
What is some of that logic?
Well, some of that logic is that if you are responsible in how you run your company, both as far as social matters and environmental and economic matters are concerned, you are most likely to survive in the specific market in which you are operating. It's also quite clear that your reputation will benefit from that, and companies with good reputations are most likely to attract the best minds in the field. They're also more likely to sell their products and services. In other words, there would be more trust and confidence in these kinds of companies. Other kind of logic behind that is that some investments or some investors would say, while I'm doing financially well, I also want to do good. It's not a case that financial investors and other investors lose their conscience the moment that they enter into the market. So there's also that element that some pension funds, for example, that invest heavily, that they would say, on behalf of our typical profile of investor, we would like to see that while we are doing financially well for them, which is obviously non-negotiable, we also want to do good at the same time.
Does it translate into performance though? Does it follow that the companies that are ethical are outperforming those on the market that aren't behaving quite as well?
I believe in general it is true, and there's a number of studies that we can revert to if we want to check on this. The Institute for Business Ethics in London over the last few years published a number of studies. One of those studies indicated that companies who report on their code of ethics in their annual report, if you just compare them to companies who don't mention their code of ethics, they outperform them on three of the specific indicators of economic value. Another finding that they found is when they started comparing companies who specifically train their employees on their ethics and on being ethically responsible, that category of company also outperformed the rest. So it seems to me that besides the logic that I just explained to you, we also have more hard figures nowadays to testify to this.
The proof of the pudding is in the eating, as they say. The SRI indices and the trackers, what's the appetite been like for those? Is it improving?
It is definitely improving, yeah. And we see more and more companies trying to become part of this specific index. In other words, they want to be known outside there as companies who have a reputation for being socially responsible.
How do we stack up JSE against the European and American counterparts? What sort of comparisons can you draw?
If we look specifically at companies and how they report on their ethics, because that's the specific focus that we took in this study,
sure.
Then we are doing quite well. And there's a dramatic improvement over the last few years, because if we look back at previous studies that were done, we saw that as recently as 2004, only about 29% of companies reported on their ethics. 2 years later, that figure was up to 70%. The specific sample that we looked at, which is the companies listed in the SRI index on the JSE, 100% of them report on their ethics. And I think it's the outcome of the first and the second King reports, which heavily emphasize triple bottom line, but also then emphasize that companies should report on their ethics performance, and they're living up to that standard. And I think what was interesting for us in this specific study was that there's a percentage which you can still say is nearly knee-jerking. There's an expectation they need to comply, but according to our analysis, about 40% of companies in the SRI would fit into that more knee-jerking, or what we call minimalist reporters. 60% of them is quite substantial, and they elaborate on their code of ethics and on their values and what they do to ensure the good ethical performance of the company.
Are there instances that you're aware of where fund managers have closed out positions because of a corporate faux pas. And we've had a couple of those in recent times, the likes of Arsenal, Mittal, and Tiger Brands on the price fixing front.
Yeah, if you look at some of the investor confidence studies that have been done, it's quite clear that when investors make their decision on whether to invest or not, they look very closely at corporate governance issues. And purely based on that, they would exclude certain companies and say, this company become very high risk, exactly because their corporate governance standards are poor.
So what's happened to the SRI ratings or weightings of those two companies, for example, Arsenal, Mittal, and Tiger Brands?
Well, we need to see what the new ratings will look like when they come out in the second half of this year. We specifically looked at the 2007 ratings, and it's the first time that we undertook this study, so we are now building up a database, and it would be very interesting to see what will happen with them now that we have the data to do more comparative studies.
Yeah, we've just got some breaking news coming through. Ian Cockrell, the former CEO of Goldfields, remember he was there for 6 years as the CEO. I'm being told he's gone. He's off to Anglo Coal, so the mystery is over about where Ian Cockrell is moving off to. In the studio, we've got Professor Deon Rossouw. Let's pick up and talk about some of the research that your establishment has done. How do you determine what is socially responsible and what isn't? And where do you draw the line from an ethical point of view?
What we have done is simply to look at companies who are already included in the SRI index. So it's not a case that we decided who are socially responsible and who are not. We simply looked at the SRI index and said these companies are companies that we expect to be ethical because they're already included in the index. Now let's look at the quality of what they report on their ethics. So we weren't interested in dividing the good apples from the bad apples. We simply said, okay, these are already responsible companies. Let's look how they report on their ethics. So we wanted to determine the quality of ethics reporting.
So the composition of the likes of an SRI index, is it based on just how ethical you are, or is it purely market cap as most indices are made of?
It takes a particularly triple bottom line approach. If you look at the criteria that is used by the JSE, you can clearly see the recommendations of the Second King report in there. So they would typically create their criteria in terms of the economic performance of the company, the social performance of the company, and the environmental performance of the company. Now, if you take just the social indicators, they would look at what the company does with regard to health and safety issues. What do they do with regard to social transformation, corporate social responsibility?
We are running out of time. You mentioned King 2. Is it still relevant?
King 2 is still relevant, but it's becoming old, and therefore King 3 is on the cards, and we hope to see the new King 3 out in the latter half of this year. I was involved in the ethics part of the Sustainability Committee, so we have already completed our first draft, and there are substantial improvements and a lot of new developments that need to be taken care of.
And we don't have time to go into those this afternoon. King 3, as we've heard from Professor Deon Rossouw, is on its way. He's a director at the Centre for Business and Professional Ethics at the University of Pretoria. Right, that's all from Power Lunch in association with MoneyWeb. We're crossing now to CNBC US for US Squawk Box. CNBC Africa is back at 4 p.m. Central African Time with Regional Roundup.